The West Highland Way in Scotland is Scotland's most popular long-distance hike, and it was my very first long-distance hike and got me addicted to this form of transportation and exploring new cultures and countries. This episode on the West Highland Way first appeared on my very first launch day of the Active Travel Adventures podcast back in September of 2017, and I hope you enjoy it. Happy birthday, dear Jamie. Happy birthday to you. I may not be able to sing, but I sure can walk. Last June, I flew over 3,600 miles and then walked over 100 miles to attend a new friend's birthday party in Scotland. To get to the party, I hiked on Scotland's most popular and imminently doable long-distance trail through multiple medieval villages and the sheep-studded countryside. The West Highland Way Trail should definitely be a consideration on your next adventure travel list. When Jamie, a Scot I met in Nicaragua, invited our hiking group to his 40th birthday party hike with his friends in Scotland, I jumped at the chance. After all, how often do you get the opportunity to hang out like a local? You first met Jamie in the Nicaragua episode number 1. He was the gent that danced with me in the town square. Jamie lives in Glasgow, and his birthday hiking weekend was going to be in Fort Williams, about 100 miles north. However, I couldn't rationalize flying across the pond for a 3-day weekend, so I figured there must be something cool I could do while I was over there. I did a quick Google search, and voila, Kismet! Scotland's most popular long-distance hike, the West Highland Way, goes from just outside Glasgow, where Jamie lives, and ends up in Fort William, where the birthday party was. Plus, there's another trail called the Kelvin Walkway that starts in Glasgow and ends at the beginning of the West Highland Way. So, I was able to hike directly from outside my Glasgow hotel all the way to the birthday party. The West Highland Way is a stunningly beautiful, moderately difficult hike through the western Scottish Highlands. About 85,000 people hike the 96-mile trail each year, taking anywhere from 4 to 10 days depending on their pace. The trail is dotted with centuries-old villages, livestock, lakes, called lochs in Scotland, castle ruins, and gentle hills. I love to backpack, but I have to say that I have a new appreciation for doing a long-distance hike where you get to take a shower at the end of the day, get to have a cold brew, a hot dinner, and a cozy bed. Plus, I used a self-guided tour company, so my main luggage was transported each day to the next stop. So all I needed to do was day pack. Very sweet. So at 57 years old, I'm kind of sold on this new luxury. Leaving the city was more scenic than I expected. I had a little bit of difficulty getting on the trail, sometimes to the town, but I found that Charlie Loran's West Highland Way guide was super helpful. Most of the locals I asked had no idea there even was a trail. Locals not knowing about trails is not as uncommon as you might think. There have been 2 times when I was on a trail town and on the Appalachian Trail and couldn't find a local who even knew that the trail went right through their town. I never got seriously lost, but want to give accolades to one, if not the single best guidebook I ever bought. It not only tells you the nitty-gritty about hiking the trail, but also has color photos of the flora and fauna, and you get great hand-drawn little don't miss this little map on the official map, along with official maps. The guidebook is put out by a company called Trailblazer, and they have a guidebook on dozens of long-distance hiking and cycling trails. Lately, I've been experimenting with not doing much, if any, research on the places I've been traveling to, and to see if the surprise adds to my experience. This has been making things a little bit more interesting. After booking this tour with zero knowledge of the landscape of Scotland, or frankly anything other than its starting and its end point, I did ask my friend Jamie if I'd inadvertently booked a technical hike. He assured me that they didn't have any dangerous or very high mountains along this particular trail, and frankly I was so busy with work I didn't do any further research before heading over there. My tour company had sent me the aforementioned guide along with a nice waterproof map, and I'm so grateful for it. It was fabulous to have all this nice reference material to use for my adventure. I knew I wanted to start this podcast, and I recently met Mike from mikesroadtrips.com. You got to check that out. He really does a great job. Anyway, he makes all these really cool videos of his trips, and I spent an afternoon with him one day, and he has this cool drone and a GoPro with a little gimbal. That's the thing that stabilizes the video. I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. I'm going to get all that stuff. So I had all these visions of bringing you all these cool videos from Scotland. So I buy all this junk and I bring it, but I don't have time to practice with it or even get the thing working. And it was heavy. And so it comes in right before my trip. And I bring it over there, and I don't know what I'm doing. Anyhow, I carry around this heavy stuff. It messes up my knee, which ends up troubling me for the rest of the trip. So anyhow, I should have known better. I usually train before I do an adventure vacation. And not only did I not train, I was carrying way too much weight. And anyway, lesson learned. No videos on that. But anyhow, back to the hike. As there are many towns along the way, you can do this adventure in a short period of time, like my speedy friend Simon, who I met on the trail, who blew through this trail in about 5 days and then went on to hike another long-distance trail called the Great Glen Way that goes from Fort Williams, my endpoint, to Inverness. Or you can take your time like I did. The average day I did was about 13 miles a day, which is about how long it takes my feet to start screaming. The trail starts at a town called Milngavie. I'm going to totally butcher all the names. I'm sorry. I don't speak Gaelic. And anyhow, Milngavie, Milngavie, but it doesn't sound, that's not how they say it. Anyhow, there's a nice, there's a grand obelisk that starts the trail right at the head. And you walk onto this nice bronze West Highland Way overhead arch, and off you go into this very gentle path through the woods. It's a very scenic and very serene way to start the trail. It was a really cool way to start. And a lot of the trail uses old military and drovers roads. Drovers roads are where they drive the cattle and the sheep when they're changing pastures. So it's a lot of very easy grade on this trail. So it's not a very hard hike. Anyhow, the first day ends in a little town called Dryman. And Dryman is a little quaint village of less than 1,000 people, and it boasts Scotland's oldest pub called the Clachan Pub. And I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's Clachan, Clachan Pub. And officially this pub's license says it began operation in 1734, but the local lore says otherwise. This pub serves Fraoch, Fraoch, which is a heather-based ale using a recipe that's over 4,000 years old. Dryman is also the western terminus of another long-distance hike in Scotland called the Rob Roy Way. Rob Roy, who is a local legend, died in 1734 and was part of the Jacobite uprising, and in his lifetime became a local legend. Locals say that Rob Roy's sister herself was actually the landlady of the Clachan Pub. A recurring theme you're going to hear in the Active Travel Adventures podcast is about the exchanges with fellow travelers and the locals that you meet in your travels, and how they become the bedrock of your favorite memories. After finishing my first day's hike, I arrived in Dryman before the rooms were ready, so I'm sitting in the nice comfy lobby getting warmed up in front of the fire, even though it's June, and I met an Australian named Russell and an expat American living in Canada named Linda. You bond so quickly when you're an adventure traveler, and the three of us not only kept up for the duration of our hikes, but also thereafter. We all know that whenever we're in each other's turf, that we'll reconnect. Russell and I ended up hiking together the next day to Ruardinen before we taxied back to Balmaha to sleep. Accommodations are really tight along the West Highland Way because the towns are so small, so it's really best to book early or to plan on camping. Frankly, even though at first I was disappointed that I wasn't able to get a room in that picturesque Ruardinen, when Russell and I encountered our first midges while enjoying our little post-hike beer outside, it turned out to be a good thing. Midges are these super annoying, teeny tiny gnats that bite, but they mostly just drive you batty. Where I live in North Carolina, we have something similarly annoying called no-see-ums. That's because they're so hard to see. I did pack this netty headgear in case the midges drove me crazy, but I really never had a reason to put it on. The only time I had an issue with these bugs at all was over that one beer in Ruardinen. One reason June is usually the preferred month to hike the West Highland Way is because the midges aren't so bad then. Apparently they can get really maddening later in the summer. But these little inexpensive head nets can help you out there. By now, Russell and I are hiking alongside the Loch Lommond. The Queen Elizabeth Forest Park is in the town of Balmaha and has a spectacular overlook on Connick Hill. We were blessed with picture-perfect weather for the summit. Less than 100 people live in this little town of Balmaha, but it's a popular day trip from Glasgow due to its really scenic beauty on this Loch Lommond and this panoramic Connick Hill vista. When you're in Balmaha, you can take a ferry ride around the loch or go over to the Inkelloch. I'm just going to keep butchering these names this whole show. I'm sorry about that. They've got a little pub at the Oak Tree Inn, which is really the only place to sleep and eat outside of a couple of ice cream places. And this little place has won Scotland's Best Independent Pub Award twice. I thought the food was pretty tasty too, and I would like to say kudos to them because they're the only place in town so they can get away with being awful. Speaking of summits, Scotland's mountains aren't overly tall. In Scotland, they call it hill walking. Most mountains aren't over 3,000 feet, 1,000 meters. However, there's some 283 that are over 1,000 meters, and many folks like my Scottish friends Jamie and Julie count how many times they climb these 3,000 footers. They call it Monroe bagging after the gentleman who first counted how many there were that were over 3,000 feet. And speaking of Scots, going back to my first night in Scotland, I thought there was something I learned from Jamie that was very interesting and an insight into Scottish humor. When I flew into Glasgow, Jamie and I met for drinks and dinner. We had drinks at a new American bar he wanted to show me that featured Pabst Blue Ribbon as the preferred American beer, as the featured American beer. I thought it was hysterical that this bar was using one of our cheapest beers to highlight American beer, and I thought it was pretty shrewd, profitably so, on the owner's part. On the way to dinner, we walked past the Gallery of Modern Art in the Royal Exchange Square. In front of the museum is a bronze statue of the first Duke of Wellington sitting on a horse. On top of his head, people keep putting plastic orange traffic cones. Several decades ago, a prankster put a cone on top of his head. The locals thought this was a hoot, and it was art, so the cone keeps getting replaced. In 2011, Lonely Planet listed this tribute as one of the 10 most bizarre monuments on Earth. I did sense that Jamie was proud of his countrymen's in-your-face art. He said the locals considered it modern art because it's in front of the Modern Art Museum, and the locals are quite fond of it. The local government spends over £10,000 a year to continuously remove these plastic cones, but the locals are just as fond of it that somebody sticks that cone right back on as soon as they take it off, and they're just as persistent in replacing it. A Facebook Keep the Cone petition garnered over 72,000 likes in just 24 hours after the city council planned to raise the statue up to inhibit the cone people. Not bad for a city with a population of under 600,000. The photo of this cone head is a hoot, so be sure to check it out at activetraveladventures.com. Now back to the hike. While walking along the Loch Lommond, Russell and I were fortunate to witness a young couple getting ready to get married. We watched the wedding party and the handsome young groomsmen in their cute kilts making all the preparations for the ceremony along the waterfront. We were so tempted to stay for the ceremony. Gratefully, I had booked a rest day in Balmaha, which gave my knee a bit of a respite. Not enough, I'm afraid, as the next day I had a 14-mile hike that was challenging but not killer for most people. Yet it still took me 9 hours to hike the 14 miles to the Dryman Inn in Inverumin. This happened to also be the most difficult day's hike of the entire trail, yet I still would rank it just maybe a 3 out of 5, a 3.5 maybe out of 5 for difficulty for this one day. There are some rock steps, so definitely more up and down stepping than the other days, but this is still a really, really doable hike for most folks that are in decent shape. It was just really hard for me because of my bad name. I would give the whole West Highland Way hike maybe a 3 out of 5 difficulty rating. Now let's talk about the historic Dryman Inn, which is located at the north end of the gorgeous Loch Lommond. All right, I know I was really tired that day and my knee hurt and I was thirsty, I was hungry and all that stuff. But this inn, which does have a charm and it's been around for centuries, is different. It is covered in taxidermied, stuffed animals of all sorts of trophies all over the place. And they don't look like they've been dusted maybe in decades. I don't know. Anyhow, I was really glad to get off my feet, and Jamie and his mom drove up from Glasgow to join me for dinner and see how I was doing, and our meals were good, the service was good, and the ambiance was very festive. I just felt like I wanted to bring out a feather duster and just kind of clean up the place a little bit. The Dryman Inn is a place that you've got to see, but it won't be your favorite place to stay on the hike. I was in the new wing, which is a building across the street that was very retro. Maybe my furnishings were dated from the 70s, although the bathroom did look remodeled a little bit newer than that. It was clean enough, but motel-y, I would say. It was my least favorite room of the whole stay. Anyhow, the next day's hike seemed to be mostly level or uphill, and happily my knee was now only troubling me when I was going downhill for some reason. Early in the hike, I met this really funny and charming man named Simon who's from England. He and I hiked together all the way to my end point of the day at Tyndrum, and Simon treated me to a really nice lunch, and afterwards he hiked on another 7 miles to the Bridge of Orchy. And as another side note, he also went to hike another long distance hike directly from there, another 73 miles on the Great Glen Way to Inverness. And so that's another option for ambitious hikers. There's tons and tons of long distance hikes in Scotland, and a lot of them intersect, so you can really hike as long as you want. Decision day. My knee is still troubling me, and I'm scheduled to hike 20 miles today. Mind you, I'd only hiked 20 miles once in my life on the Appalachian Trail. Knowing that I was in for some really unpleasant Scottish cold rain this day, I planned to start my hike at 5 a.m. The weather was that nasty 40-degree rain shooting darts sideways, piercing into your eyeballs kind of rain. Dutifully, I set out for Bridge of Orchy, 7 miles away, promptly at 5. It wasn't a difficult hike, but man was it cold. I had all the right gear except for my gloves were thermal but not waterproof, so I didn't even bother wearing them because all they do is just make it just as nasty. So anyhow, Simon had mentioned to me about waterproof gloves, but I haven't found any stores. All the towns are too small that there's no place for me to buy a pair. So by the time I reached Bridge of Orchy, my hands are like frozen claws from clutching my hiking poles. I had all the right other gear, so the rest of me was pretty toasty, but I just couldn't even move the fingers of my hands. They were like seemingly permanently hooked, like they were holding onto the grips of my hiking sticks. When I made it to the town and I found a little inn to get some coffee and a warm breakfast, I went in to wash up. I could not even grip the toilet paper. My hands were so frozen. They kept falling out of my hands. In the restaurant, I was embarrassed about making such a puddle with all my wet clothes, but the innkeeper seemed nonplussed. They smiled and said they were used to it. Now toasty and reading my trusty guide, the next 13 miles of the day were across the most barren land of the hike. Not a house or a road for 50 square miles. In this awful weather, if I had any kind of a mishap or got lost or injured, I would be in serious trouble. Plus, I'm still having these knee issues. So I decided to use my gray hairs, and I made the executive decision to use the backup plan that my tour company had provided me. I ended up taking a local bus to my next destination. Best £4.50 I ever spent. The rest of the day was spent leisurely looking out of the big picture window at the ski lodge while eating delicious hot soup and enjoying hot chocolate and just having a lovely afternoon. There's this big picture window, and the ski slopes are now mountain biking trails because it's now June. And there's these two young boys going up and down the ski lift and riding their bikes down, and their faces and their smiles, it was just priceless. They entertained me for hours while I waited my shuttle bus. My right knee appreciated the time off, so the hike the next day to Kinlochleven wasn't so bad, despite climbing the Devil's Staircase. The view from the top of Devil's Staircase is really a highlight, and I was grateful that the weather was once again cooperating. It is straight up, and it's a bit hard, but I'm inclined to believe the story that said it got the name's Devil's Staircase from the builders carving those stone steps, rather than the climbers calling it the Devil's Staircase. It's a bit difficult, but not that killer. The view is really killer, though. Heading to the town of Kinlochleven, you'll see some massive hydroelectric tubes to your right, built, as I understand it, for an aluminum smelting business. Kinlochleven, a modest town of just over 1,000 residents, can boast it was the very first town in the world where every single home had electricity. When you make it to Kinlochleven, you'll find it's a cute little town at the head of Loch Lommond, and it's surrounded forward-like by all sorts of mountains. And while you're there, don't miss stopping by the famous Bothy Bar in the McDonald Hotel. Coming from the U.S., where I think something is old when it's 100 years old, it's amazing to me that all these places that are centuries old don't even bother announcing how old they are. When hiking this trail, you're going to hear a lot and read a lot about the MacDonalds, which is a large and proud Scottish clan. When you made it to Kinlochleven, you've just passed the Glencoe Pass area, which is stunningly beautiful. I thought it was the prettiest area in the whole trip. This is the site of the Glencoe Massacre of 1692, infamous because 38 unarmed MacDonalds were murdered by the Earl of Argyll's regiment, which was led by Robert Campbell. Worse yet, this massacre was authorized by the government. What makes the crime so heinous is that this regiment had been the guests of the MacDonalds for a couple of weeks before they were then turned around and killed their hosts. Here it is 300 years later, 300 years, and I saw signs on some businesses saying, "No Campbell's welcome." After Kinlochleven, we were in the little home stretch into the hike into Fort William, which is a decent-sized town of about 10,000 residents and has all the amenities and a cute downtown area on the water. Fort William is an adventure traveler's mecca. Not only is the hiking good in this area, but the mountain biking is also a big attraction. The Great Glenway Trail that Simon continued on can also be biked as well as hiked from this area. While in town, it's a worthy stop to stop at the West Highland Museum so you can learn a little bit more about the history of Scotland and the clans. The original fort at Fort Williams was built in 1654, and you can see remnants of a fort on the hike as you come into town. The trail ends in the heart of town on the pedestrian main road at the Sore Feet bronze statue designed by David A. Anand. Yet another tip-off to the Scottish sensibilities and humor. You can see my smiling face sitting next to Mr. Sorefeet at the ActiveTravelAdventures.com website. Many hikers add to their hike a climb of Ben Nevis, the UK's highest peak at over 4,400 feet, which is in Fort William. I was still a bit concerned about my knees, so I chose a different path. I met up again with my new hiking friend Simon, and we had dinner the night I arrived in Fort William. The next day, after coffee also with Simon, still a bit concerned about my knee, I chose a different path. I ended up taking the famous scenic train ride to Milngavie. This is a picture postcard, beautiful, perfect ride. You take this extraordinarily beautiful train ride to Milngavie, have lunch, visit the museum to learn about the town's history and its importance as Western Scotland's most important commercial fishing port, walk around a bit, and then take the train back. And yay! While I was there, I found an outfitter, so I was able to buy a pair of waterproof gloves. You can also take the historic steam train up there. It's the same view as the regular train, so it just costs a little bit more. I just took the regular one. It's almost time for the birthday party. Jamie and his friends arrived the next day. It was so cool to hang out with his friends, and they didn't seem to mind that I was an old lady. Granted, they were young enough to be my kids, but they actually seemed pretty cool having me around. Plus, Jamie's mom, Carol, also came too, so I wasn't the only one of a certain age. We were a large party, and it was hard to find a restaurant to take us to dinner without reservations, so we ended up at this Chinese restaurant that had no customers, which made us a little bit nervous, as all the other restaurants were packed. Gratefully, everything went well, and happily we had many customers before we left. I've been worried about food turnover and sanitation issues, etc., and I'm happy to report that no one got sick and we all enjoyed our meal. The next day was the big hike for Jamie's birthday. We took a train to the mountain for our climb. The weather that day was as pleasant as my clawed hand day. Bitter, raw, cold, awful, piercing rain with about 10 feet of visibility. I was so grateful for my new waterproof gloves and because I was fine even though the weather was miserable. My mom always told me, if you have the right clothes, it doesn't make a difference what the weather is. She is so right, folks. The funny thing about adventure travel is that when you look back, it's the things that didn't go well that you remember most fondly. I think about how I couldn't hold that toilet paper that morning in Bridge of Orchid. My hands were just so frozen. But I notice that I'm smiling when I think about it or I tell the story. I think about climbing that Munro for Jamie's birthday when we were pretty much in whiteout conditions, unable to see a few feet in front of ourselves in this bitter, cold, piercing rain. We only paused briefly at the summit for a quick photo op before racing back down to get into some heat. Yet, it was one of the highlights of our trip. I was blessed with pretty good weather most of my trip except for the 2 days I just talked about. But I find it's overcoming the obstacles and persevering that I remember most and that I remember most fondly. Overcoming obstacles seems to make me proud of myself, and I seem to enjoy pushing myself. When we were back down the mountain, now safely warm, and we had soup in our bellies while we were waiting for our train back to Fort William, we were laughing at the cold and the rain. We cheered our endurance. We relished reliving the misery. Why is that? I don't know, but I see it time and again on any adventure trip I take. When I look back, it's the things that went wrong or the most difficult challenges that set that adventure apart from the others, and that's where the memories come from. When I look back on this adventure, I smile more about that clawed hand than I do about that perfect view on the top of Conic Hill. I think it must do with us pushing ourselves, enduring the challenges, and then triumphing over them. People who choose to do adventure travel for their vacations are different than most people. We seem to have this odd pat ourselves in the back for overcoming the challenges mentality. We actually seem to thrive on it a little bit. We get dirty and sweaty and are often uncomfortable and sometimes even a little pain. My family and friends sometimes don't understand why I'm doing this. Some friends are envious, but they wouldn't do it themselves. But if you're listening to this, I'm betting you're one of my people and you get it. And I'm so glad you do. My takeaway of hiking the West Highland Way in Scotland is that this is a very doable hike for almost anyone in good shape. You can do it self-guided like I did it. You can plan your own adventure and even backpack the trip like Simon did. Although when he heard about how I had my luggage transferred, he wished he'd done that. The West Highland Way is a very popular trail, and accommodations in these small little villages are limited, so you need to plan well in advance. You can download my free travel planner from the website, or you'll get it automatically in the monthly newsletter next month. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to this, the Active Travel Adventures podcast, and the companion how-to of adventure travel podcast called the Adventure Travel Show podcast. I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks at Venture On.